Welcome to Food for Thought. Today, we've brought together Amy Francis-Smith, architect and access and design consultant, and Faith Grange, UK consulting lead at Microsoft. Over lunch, they talk about inclusive design, employment, and reasonable adjustments.
Hi Amy, it's so good to welcome you to Microsoft today. I'm really delighted to get the chance to sit down and have a chat with you.
Thanks Faith, we appreciate you taking the time.
Do you know, I'd love to hear a bit about, just to hear about how you got into inclusive design in the first place and what kind of really makes you passionate about it. It'd be great to hear.
I kind of got into inclusive design partly through my own experience and also sort of exposure to friends and family, and I was exposed to my own mother, who is a sort of intermittent crutches and wheelchair user. So as a young adult, I was helping to sort of care for her and navigate the built environment and trying to drag a wheelchair across cobblestones or up a Plymouth Hoe, which is a very steep hill, or sort of going, rather than the main entrance with everybody else up a nice set of grand stairs, you're going round the back, through the bins, through the kitchen, and eventually meet up with the rest of your group. So those kinds of things started to sort of seed into my consciousness as a designer. I was repeatedly seeing multiple people having issues or facing frustrations that were really sort of needless, and in the grand scheme of it, quite small, minor aspects, but you know, those kind of like micro points add up to a lot of frustration through a day or through a lifetime. So that kind of led me into looking at how we can make our spaces, not only our physical but our digital worlds, more accessible for people, and just, you know, make things a little bit easier, really.
Yeah, it's great. It's so interesting you say that. My sister-in-law is a wheelchair user, and it makes me so conscious when I go to buildings of that door is not wide enough, you know, that there's no way you're getting there. And that experience you talked about, I remember we went to the theatre, the wheelchair entrance, it was down an alley, almost through the kitchen, and we were going for this big grand theatre experience, and it just was, it genuinely didn't feel the same.
Yeah. There's that point of products and spaces, only when an issue arises do people recognise that, oh, I just assumed things would be better than they already are. And like you say, it's only when you get exposed to either through yourself or through loved ones or close family or friends that you sort of go, oh, this is actually really frustrating.
How do you think about inclusive design? How do you think about making workplaces inclusive for people with a variety of, I guess, disabilities? How would you start thinking about that?
Well, there's multiple aspects. My first one, obviously I'm an architect, so ultimately I always think about the physical space of something. Like, if someone can't even get through the front door, then how can you expect to employ people? And
how can they ever feel included, truly
exactly,
included?
Like, literally, if you, that's really basic 101. Like, if you haven't got, you know, I've worked in offices before where either wheelchair users couldn't physically get in the building. So it's kind of considering those elements and sort of looking around the room and going, okay, who is here or who isn't here? And sort of thinking, okay, why aren't they here? There's, you know, the hiring process. Have you yourself gone through the form that you have to fill in and actually it's really awkward, or you can't save it as you go along, you've got to start again? It could even just be around who you've got on your website, or just like the kind of social media images you're putting out, who's using your products, who's visiting your shops.
Well, I guess if you come at it from a viewpoint of never having had any of those experiences, how would you know? Like, even to, so it's almost like if we only ever have people who are able-bodied and haven't really had those experiences as designing things, well, then you won't think of those things. So perhaps there's something around how do we make sure that more people who have that viewpoint can be involved in that process?
Yeah, completely. I'm one of the things I bang on about all the time is around, you know, including more people into the process, allowing a more diverse and inclusive workspace, because, like you say, you haven't got that same kind of world view that has produced many amazing products already. But if you throw someone else in that's got a completely different perspective, that's when those kind of exciting, innovative points could come through. And off the back of the quite well-known slogan, "Nothing about us without us," which is sort of a disability campaign activist slogan, where it's about making sure that the people who you're providing for or designing for or writing policy about are also included as part of that conversation. Sort of using user-led design as well. You know, it could just be like focus groups, and it could be sort of trying to get feedback on sort of prototypes, and then sort of actually use that valuable feedback as a way of then sort of iterate further, rather than kind of go, oh, we've had some negative feedback, that's really inconvenient and awkward, I'm just going to ignore it. So, you know.
Something I really, really stand by is you know, that we want to empower every person on the planet to do more. If you're going to empower every person on the planet, you have to represent every person on the planet. So I think
that's
that
a
really
huge ask.
I mean, it is a huge
it's
ask.
Impossible.
It's a huge ask. But actually, I think if you hold yourself to that very high standard, you know, it's like shoot for the moon and you might get the stars kind of thing. We're still learning, and actually, it's sort
process.
of absolutely, and we were doing kind of quite a bit of hiring, and we were doing sort of almost like assessment centre type things where you had like 3 interviews in a day. And actually I started talking to some individuals who worked for me who are neurodiverse, and they pointed out that actually that's quite difficult to go through that process with neurodiversity. So actually with that feedback, kind of we went back through some of our loops and said, okay, so we maybe need to think about like, okay, well, one of the interviews should be on a different day, or try and space them out like 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, to give that kind of scope and capacity. Having that real open environment where people are encouraged to speak and feel like they can, and that there's not going to be any repercussions for that. I mean, in some ways, for me, working in Microsoft, we're in such a privileged environment with our culture that you almost go, gosh, why would anybody ever feel like that? But of course, that isn't the same everywhere. And of course, individuals will come in and not have experienced that previously. And you have to be really sensitive. You have to really work at making sure that that is the culture that you live and breathe every day.
Yeah, there's always that kind of interplay of, especially if you start a job, you don't know the people, you don't know the team, you don't want to like make up too much of a storm, or be that diva that's like, I demand all these aspects, or actually you maybe have already heard 20 other people ask for those really obvious standard things, but you just maybe aren't aware that they are on offer for you, they exist even.
I know the sort of HR legal language is sort of reasonable adjustment or something like that, and that for me was always, I mean, it does feel a little jarring, because it's kind of like, well, who defines reasonable?
Oh, so vague.
In that
so
vague. And actually then you're almost putting out there that you can only ask me for something that is considered reasonable. So so it almost puts a barrier up to that. Whereas actually, if just, well, how can I help you to be more comfortable at work? Or how can I help you to be more effective? Or how do you like to work? Like more open questions around
like
that.
You've invited and rephrasing it.
Yeah, and maybe you can't change the entire scope of a job, but you're much more likely to get an answer that somebody feels like they can genuinely ask what they want, and you really understand the problem, than somebody going, well, you probably wouldn't consider that reasonable, so I just won't ask that question.
Yeah, this reasonable adjustment is so vague. Like it's the legalised term that's used off the back of the Equality Act, and that's the basis of a lot of physical aspects through the building regulations and construction as well. That term reasonable adjustment.
Does that go into like the physical design as well? Is that?
It's more around. So, say someone wanted to be able to access a shop. There's a super vague spectrum of, does reasonable mean, oh, there's a temporary ramp that if I ring a bell, someone comes out and plops it in front of me. Or like, is it then reasonable for this small independent shop owner that's renting the units and doesn't own the strip of pavement outside of their shop to then spend thousands of pounds putting a ramp in? But that's obviously one specific example. Whereas like, you could be in an airport and you're trying to navigate to the plane, and it's reasonable that someone should be able to help you get onto the plane without having all your luggage or your wheelchair disappear, or someone's like literally had to manhandle you with like a piggyback up a set of stairs because they've suddenly lost the lift to get into the plane. Like that is a reasonable thing that most people would be allowed to expect. It's just about talking to people, really. It's really ultimately the kind of the underlying basis of it, which is really quite simple, really.
So yeah, I think if we want people to feel like Microsoft is a place that they could be, that they could join, that they could work, we have to show that. We talk about kind of come as you are and do what you love, but that means that we have to show people showing up as they are. And we often use our own staff and to actually genuinely show the people that work at Microsoft. I think that's incredibly important to kind of make people feel like Microsoft is a place that everyone could have a place at.